First, I'd like to thank StirTrek for having me this year. It's been a great opportunity to be here and to see people I haven't seen in a while, and also get the chance to speak, which is I really look forward to. Thank you to all of our sponsors for this year. Certainly wouldn't be possible for this event to be as big and kind of incredible as it is without the help of all those sponsors. So I hope you've had a chance to visit some of those today as you've been walking around. So the title of this talk is Why a $10 Billion Snapchat is Good News for You. So why is Snapchat good news, and specifically why for you? We're going to get into that shortly. But before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I love puppies and long walks on the beach. I'm also work as a managing architect for ICC, a consulting firm here based in Columbus, Ohio. This is my shameless plug. Now, forgive me for a few seconds here. And what we do is we help companies solve business problems through technology. We have offerings in application development through .NET, Java, open source. We have capabilities in business analytics, core infrastructure, as well as a complete digital marketing suite. ICC is the largest privately held IT consulting firm in Central Ohio. We have clients nationally as well as throughout the Great Lakes region, and we're glad to be a sponsor again this year of StirTrek. So I want to put forward a small disclaimer first. In this session, we're going to be focusing primarily on market value, on money, on negotiation. But I'd like to put this into kind of a broader perspective. I think most of us are in development and technology because it's what we like to do. It's what we're interested in. And your market value is important precisely because it allows you to keep doing what you love and enjoy doing, which is technology. All right, so with that said, the important thing to know now is that we are all going on a road trip. All of us here together in this room are going. Now, did everybody bring their signed permission slips and lunch money? No? That was supposed to be in the session description, I guess they cut that out. But if you could get those to me by the end of the session, that'd be great. Liability and everything. So it's going to be a road trip. It's going to be relatively short, hopefully less than an hour, so you can get to the movie. Here's what we're going to be traveling in. This is a 1994 Toyota Corolla. Well, the car is. The thing in front of the car is my son, Simon. He's going with us too. We're going to need to pick him up in a couple of minutes. Now, I should mention, this car itself, it may not look like much here, but it is arguably the greatest automobile created by humankind on the history of the planet Earth. And that's pretty good. So that's why we're taking this particular car. And there's more to this car's story, and that'll become more relevant later. So this is a road trip, but it's not about just getting from point A to point B. We're going to do some stops along the way, do some sightseeing, much like Jay Tower did in his previous presentation. We're going to hit 3 different stops along the way. The first is a city called No. It's a pretty sizable city, and that's because it holds a lot of knowledge, hence the name. So we're going to be stopping here first because there's just a few things we have to know about ourselves and about our potential value, our market value. The second place is a smaller town called Ask. If we are talking about our market value and about getting it, at some point we're going to have to ask for it. Now, Ask is a small town. It's a pretty simple place, but to get to anywhere else, you have to go through here. So that's why we're going. Our third destination is not so much a place, but as it is a choice. It's the fork in the road known as reject and receive. This determines where our journey goes and what happens when we get there. It's not one of those things you can decide ahead of time. You only know which one of these to take once you arrive. In terms of our market value, this is the point where you're really tested, not only in how well you know your market value, but in how well you believe it. All right, so I'd like everybody to get in the car now, metaphorically. It only seats 5 people, so we're going to have to squeeze together tight. So if you could get a little closer to your neighbor at this point, that'll help us out. Looks like we're also going to need a license plate, so we'll see what we can do about that on the way. So we're here in the driveway, and we're all waiting for my son Simon, who I introduced to you earlier. He's in the house, and apparently there's something he just has to post to Instagram. And the only thing I can figure is that it has to be the nuclear launch codes, because if he doesn't post whatever he says he needs to post, the world's going to come to an end. And I say, okay, well, fine, do what you need to do. So I want to apologize profusely to all of you for having to wait for my son here. But while we're waiting, I'd like to tell you a couple quick stories, and the first is about Evan Spiegel. Anybody heard of Evan Spiegel? Anybody know who he is? All right, he is the co-founder and CEO of Snapchat. If you go out to Wikipedia, this is what he looks like. Does anybody here use Snapchat? Have used it? Anybody? Okay. All right. So it's a social media app, and it's based on the idea that you can send select messages to your friends, and after a certain period of time, those messages are going to self-destruct. Of course, as developers, we kind of have to laugh at the idea that anything on the internet ever actually goes away, but that's another story. So sometimes he looks like this in this picture, and other times he looks like this. And my son tells me this is the face that you are supposed to make when you're taking a picture in Snapchat. Now, for our purposes, we don't really care what Snapchat is or what it does. The real story here is its value, its market value. So in early 2013, Snapchat was valued at around $60 or $70 million. And then in mid-2013, after another funding round, it was valued at $800 million. Then it was $2 billion. By the end of 2013, Facebook tried to buy Snapchat for, does anybody remember how much? How much? $3 billion, that's right. Now, the title of this talk is Why a $10 Billion Snapchat is Good News for You. That's actually kind of dated now. Does anybody know how much Snapchat is actually worth today? Anybody have any guesses? Sorry? 6 billion? Higher than that.
10 billion.
Higher than that.
12.
Higher than that.
20.
Almost. $16 billion. It's been as high as 20 billion, but most recently it was valued at 16, which is still pretty good. All right, so we can update this a little bit. $16 billion Snapchat, but what's the good news? And there are two things that are the good news. First, your market value is under your control. Now, that's not the way we usually think of it. Most of us think that our company, our customers, and our clients define our value, but that's really not the case. Now, Evan Spiegel and Snapchat had to put in the hard work of shipping an application with the features that customers wanted just to get in the ballgame, just to have something out there that people would buy. They could have said yes to Mark Zuckerberg, and it would have ended right there. Snapchat's final market value would have been $3 billion. End of story. But Evan Spiegel and Snapchat didn't allow Facebook to dictate or decide Snapchat's market value. Snapchat had confidence in their application and its features. So simply by saying no to Facebook, using the power of rejection that they had, they were able to increase their valuation over five times over. And that's the kind of control that you can also have over your market value. The second piece of good news is that your market value is higher than you think it is. I don't know that any of us here are worth $16 billion or $20 billion. And if you are, congratulations. You should probably be out spending money somewhere and not sitting with us in a mid-90s Corolla. But I think most of us go into price and salary negotiation and we sell ourselves short. Most of us, I would bet, tend to undervalue ourselves. So next time, instead of undervaluing yourself, think about how a $16 billion Snapchat was able to build its value in spite of what everyone else was telling them. Everybody said Facebook is crazy to spend $3 billion for Snapchat, and now Snapchat is everywhere. I still don't use it, because I don't understand it, but I'm old. All right, so I said I would tell you two stories before we headed on our trip, and yes, we're still waiting for my son to post those nuclear launch codes. We just finished the first story. The second story is shorter. The first was about Evan Spiegel, and the second story is about me. No, I'm not worth $16 billion, and my range of facial expressions is much more limited than Evan Spiegel's is. However, I've been in software development for almost 20 years, and in that time, I've been a full-time employee, an hourly subcontractor, a consultant, and a freelance web designer and developer. I've been fired twice. Surprisingly enough, it turns out being fired is not the end of the world, but I think if I can get myself fired for a third time, then I will be a true expert in that, and I can start to give talks on how the best way to get fired. I also don't have a lot of pictures of myself, so I have to be a little creative in how I use them. And clearly I need a new picture because I have way too much hair in that one. But the point of my story is that in all of these roles that I've had over the past 20 years or so, it's only been in the last few years that I've gotten to the point where I think I'm able to know and to get my market value. Over those last 20 years, I have made a lot of mistakes and learned some lessons. So that's my story. That's why I'm here. I want to share with you what I have learned over that time to be able to give you a head start in some of those areas so you can apply these lessons and advice. So one last thing before we get started on the road. The subtitle to this talk is Knowing and Getting Your Market Value. Now, I have to be honest, I don't really like the term market value. It sounds a little cold, a little detached. Makes me think of, people as commodities or as our, what we like to favorite term, resources, right? We all love to be resources on projects. But it's one of those phrases that we all sort of know what we mean by it. So we're just going to accept its limitations and run with it. And what I mean by market value is the value that an employer or a client or a customer is willing to trade in return for your work. So value in this case can be a lot of different things. It might be a salary. It might be an hourly rate. It might be a fixed price or a cool working environment, benefits, the chance to work on great and challenging problems, or as certain startups in Silicon Valley like to say, a chance to change the world. That's really what we're all looking for. And just as value can take many forms, so can work. It might be whatever you can get done in an hour of your time or a week. It might be a product or a service. Now, when we talk about market value, when we talk about money, a lot of us tend to shrink back and think, well, isn't trying to get our market value kind of creepy? Isn't it really about greed, after all? Now, I'm not trying to say that greed works or that greed is good or anything like that. To me, it's a question not only of fairness, but ultimately of respect. I am doing my best work for my employer, or I'm delivering the best product or service I can for my customer or client. So being able to know and to get my market value creates mutual respect and fairness, I think. When we perceive an imbalance between work and value, and that will create tension that makes the work harder. So in seeking fair value, what we're really looking for is stability in our working relationship. So those are my two stories, and it looks like my son is ready to go. So let's all hit the road together. So we've been on the road for a bit, and there's probably one question you're asking yourselves. So let's imagine you're a small child in the back seat. You've been on the road for a while. What question might you be asking at this time? Exactly, are we there yet? And actually, we are there. We are there right now. We have arrived at the city of No. Now, there are three things you have to get to know while you're here. The first and most important is yourself. When we are talking about market value, you can't get anywhere without discovering a few things about yourself, about you. No matter what position or situation you're exploring, whether it's salaried full-time employment or independent freelance work, you are in essence selling yourself. No one else is going to do that for you. In fact, the people you come across in a negotiation are going to be working against you. Not intentionally, not in a malicious way, but it's just that the process is necessarily adversarial. You have two parties who want two different things until you can both come to an agreement. A big part of that is a belief in yourself, and that belief has to be strong. So I'm going to try and channel my best motivational speaker here, my inner Tony Robbins, and say that you all have strengths that you are not fully aware of. You know more than you think you do, and you have more experience than you think. A lot of times as developers, we tend to downplay our abilities. I know I do, and our contributions. Water real quick here. Anybody read Hacker News? Hacker News, are you familiar with it? Yeah, I'm a Hacker News junkie myself. If you're not familiar with it, it is a news aggregator that's devoted to startups, development, and other tech topics. And if you do read Hacker News, you're probably familiar with the Show HN feature. Show Hacker News. That's where readers post the projects that they're working on, like a website or yet another JavaScript framework, software as a service, and it's always something amazing, like, "Hi Hacker News, check out this airline reservation system I just hacked together in a weekend while I was sitting by the pool," that kind of thing. And you'd think that everyone on Hacker News is a genius because all I did last weekend was stub my toe after stepping on a Lego. But the truth is, Hacker News, and tech news in general, is focused on success stories. The very best work of thousands of people all being shown to you at the same time. We fall into the trap of comparing ourselves to those, and of course, we're going to fall short. Now, sometimes the tendency to undervalue ourselves can be attributed to what's called cognitive bias. Now, cognitive bias is anything that affects our ability to think rationally. One example might be confirmation bias, which is where you seek out news, information that confirms what you already know and believe. Like when Democrats only watch MSNBC or Republicans only listen to Sean Hannity. It affects our ability to think objectively and rationally. Another example of cognitive bias is what's been termed the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Anybody heard of this one? Anybody familiar? It's been out there for a while. It's named after a couple researchers at Cornell University. And what Dunning and Kruger did was take a group of students and give them tests on various subjects like science or English. Before the students found out how they did on the test, they were asked how well they thought they did. And what Dunning and Kruger found was that people who did worst on the test thought they did much better. And the people who did the best on the test actually thought they did worse than they actually did. So you can see here from this graph, the green line represents the actual test scores. And you can see on the right-hand side that people with the highest scores actually underestimated their ability. Because they did well on the test, and they thought they did well, they figured the test was easy, and so everyone else must be having the same experience. So we need to recognize our tendency and to think this way. We need to be able to step back and know objectively the skills that we have and how much we know. We need to be confident in ourselves and our abilities. And remember, that's part of the good news. Your market value is higher than you think because your capabilities are greater than you think. Your experience and your knowledge are both greater than you think they are. So in that spirit, let's take a kind of a step back and look at where you all are today. You're at a tech conference in the middle of the day, a beautiful Friday. You're learning to improve your knowledge. You're adding experience. And just the fact that you are here is a great indicator that you have passion for what you do, you're interested in what you do, and you want to improve yourselves. So think about that and believe that about yourselves. Also remember the other good news. The more confidence you have in yourself, the more you know and believe your strengths, experiences, and abilities, the more control you're going to eventually have over your market value. So if the first thing we need to know is ourselves, the second thing we need to know about market value is, well, the value. Now, if you don't have a good idea of what your market value is going into a negotiation, you're going to be at a major disadvantage because people on the other side of the negotiation are either going to have a very good idea of your value, in which case they can give you what seems to be a reasonable offer, though it isn't, or they will have no idea what your value is, and they may not even know what to offer. So in either case, you need to know it so that you can defend it. And how do you find your market value? Well, a great place to start out, as you might expect, is the internet. There are a number of sites that will give you a rough estimate of where your market value might be based on your job title, your location, pay scale, which I've got up here as one example. Another good resource is the Robert Half Salary Guide for Technology Professionals. The Robert Half Guide also breaks down salaries by job title and location, but it also includes how much a given skill set is worth as well. For example, if you have performance testing skills, you can add 4% to whatever they list the salary for your position to be. If you have Oracle database skills, depending on your position, you could add up to 7% to it. And apparently you can also add about 900% to your market value if you have the ability to shoot lasers out of your hands. That's honestly in the manual. Now, one problem with a lot of job sites is that they provide salary info for job titles you have no idea what they mean. So what's a senior web application engineer do? They don't tell you, but they tell you what it pays, maybe, if you're lucky. But this guide also provides a detailed description for each of the job titles. So you can find a job title that matches more specifically the kind of work you do and where, so you can find the salary that applies to you. There are other sites you might be familiar with, salary.com, Indeed, Glassdoor. You can do searches of various job boards. I'll also have this on the Stir Trek GitHub if you want to check out any of these resources later. There's a nice collection of salary surveys at jobstar.org. And the last link there is a really good discussion of salary negotiation in general that I think you should check out. Now, if you're looking for an hourly rate as opposed to a yearly salary, the rule of thumb is to divide that yearly salary by 2,000, which is the number of hours in a year minus a couple weeks vacation. But if you're freelancing, you're going to want to take that hourly rate and increase it by up to 2 to 4 times. It sounds like a lot, up to $100 an hour, but it's really compensating for all those things you do as a freelancer that would ordinarily be supplied by your employer. Office space, benefits, office materials, access to the internet, anything like that. And it's also important to not keep it too low because you may not be actually working 2,000 hours as a freelancer. So you have to keep that in mind as well. However, this type of research online is only the start of the process, only the first step. The problem with the results you get on sites like these is that it's an approximation, it's a range, an average. So let's bring our good news back. Because we've established that you're the type of person who attends a tech conference on a weekday, you are likely at the top of that range. Again, whatever you find on those sites is probably going to be low. Your market value is higher than you think. There's another concept that has the potential to increase your market value or at least improve your perspective on what it might be. Has anyone heard of this? Familiar with this term? Veblen Good? So the term Veblen Good was named for the economist Thorstein Veblen. And a Veblen good is something that becomes more desirable as its price increases. Counterintuitively, usually you'd think something would be more desirable as its price drops. Good example of this is the iPhone. As you're probably aware, Apple does not sell a cheap version of their iPhone. They don't sell a budget version because people buy the iPhone, in part because it's expensive. It has status to it. It has something, not everyone can get it. Now, if you saw an iPhone selling for $50, would you think, wow, what a deal? Probably not. You'd probably think, well, what's wrong with this? What's the problem? What is this phone missing? And that leads us back to your market value is higher than you think. If you were to tell your employer, hey, I'll work for you for $5,000 a year, what's your employer going to think? What a bargain. I'm going to hire this guy. Probably not. If I'm the employer, I'm thinking, what's wrong with this person? Why are they only charging me $5,000 a year? Am I only going to get $5,000 a year of work from this person? So by identifying your market value as higher, you are signaling in a sense that your work is worth more. In a sense, you become a Veblen good, and as a result, your market value is actually higher than you think it is. So at this point, we're still talking about generalities in your market value using some of the tools and concepts that we've talked about. But how can we get more specific, more exact? There's a couple of ways that I've come across. First, how many of you are on LinkedIn? All right, just about everybody. And if you're not, you should be. It's a good tool if you want to increase your market value. And how many of you have come into contact with recruiters, technical or otherwise? Yeah, not this kind of recruiter. I'm talking about technical recruiters. How many of you have had good experiences with technical recruiters? Yes. How many of you have had bad experiences? Yeah, a little more hands for the bad. But I think that the stereotype of the bad technical recruiter is mostly that. It's a stereotype. Lots of good ones out there, the ones who really take the time to communicate with you, really understand your experience and goals. And we have plenty of those at ICC. You should come talk to them. Now, some of the bad ones are easier to pick out. The one that asks you if you're interested in a WebSphere administrator position when clearly your resume shows you've been working on front-end JavaScript for the last 5 years. What I've discovered about good recruiters is that they have an excellent sense of what a given skill set is worth in a particular location in terms of its market value. So researching, interviewing, and negotiation is something that recruiters do day in and day out. So I would encourage you to work with recruiters if you're not already. Find the good ones, make an appointment. Again, not with these guys, or you will find yourself in a completely different type of job. And it's excellent practice for actual negotiations when the time comes, because they will ask you about your market value and what you think it should be. And even if you already have a job, this is something you should consider doing, just so you have a good handle on what you're actually worth in the marketplace. Now, this is not to say that the only reason you should contact a recruiter is for practice. They probably wouldn't like that. And while you might not be signing your life away to a given recruiter, you never know what can happen. The recruiter may lead you to a job, a new opportunity, or another contact. It helps you get connected and comfortable in that type of negotiating situation, which again leads us back to our good news. Your market value is under your control. The more practice you have in an interview or negotiation session, the more comfortable you will be, the more confident you're going to be, all of which gives you more control. So in the city of No, we visited self, we visited value. We have one more quick stop before we head out on the road again, and that's history. You have to know your history. By the way, I know we're driving around in a 94 Toyota Corolla, but as you see here, it could always be worse. I was told all these passed their emissions tests, by the way. Now, when I say you have to know your history, I'm speaking about your experience. You have to have a clear vision of what you've accomplished and how it fits into your career. First, you have to know your history, and then you have to communicate it effectively. That starts with your LinkedIn profile. Make sure it's well-written, concise, accurate, and professional. And you should approach in the same way with any other online presence you have. GitHub, your website, your blog, anything else. Now, I know it's the 21st century, and everybody likes to say they don't use traditional resumes anymore, but more times than not, somebody is going to want to see a resume in Word or PDF format on a piece of paper. So get your resume together, make sure it's updated, and make sure that it reads well. Have a friend review it, hire a resume writer if you have to, because a lot of times this is the first and only impression that people will see of you is your resume. How many of you guys have used Pluralsight? Pluralsight, it's an online video training, a lot of technology stuff. They also now have a video course on technical resume writing, which is kind of interesting. So if you have a subscription, you might want to check it out, or you can do a free trial on their site. I don't work for them or anything. And finally, you have to perform your history. You have to take what you've already communicated in written form and learn to present it in a persuasive way to tell your own story. Practice it with people you know. Work with recruiters so you can tell your story again and again. So you can do it automatically. So you can be able to convince people that you are worth what you say you are worth. Knowing, communicating, and performing your history is also important even if you're not looking for a new job. I keep a record of every time I do something, every time I get an email from a client that says I'm doing something, did something well. I keep track of anything that I've done that adds value to the company, saves money, and when it's time for my review, I can present all these things and communicate it and present it in a way that it bolsters my case. So your market value is, again, under your control. You may not control what your history is, because I was fired twice, so I can't go back and control that. But you do control how your history is presented and perceived by others, how well you communicate it and perform it. And how well your history comes across is something that affects your market value, and is certainly something that you do have control over. And with that, we're finished with the city of no. It's been fun, but we've got to press on down the road. I think there's a question that's on your minds. I think, anybody have another question at this point you might be asking? Yes, it's Are We There Yet? And the immortal words of Mr. Incredible, we will get there when we get there. But, as it so happens, we are there. We have finally arrived at the small town of Ask. This is where negotiations begin. This is where you move from knowing your market value to actually getting it. And we're not going to be here long, but there are a few rules that the town has. They're a little strange. And the first is you do not talk about the town of Ask. Now, what do I mean by that? Simply that when you start discussions with a client or a customer or enter your first interview with a company, you do not talk about price. You do not talk about salary or anything related to your market value. And that's for two reasons. First, you want to have the opportunity to sell yourself. You want the other person to fall in love with you in a professional sense. So how do you move past talking about price in that situation? So if I'm negotiating for a full-time position, this is kind of my favorite phrase. I say something like, I'd rather talk about salary and price later, if that's okay. I don't want to price myself out of a great opportunity. And saying something like this signals that first, money is not my primary motivator, which is true. Second, I'm excited about the work. It sounds good. And third, as it relates to market value, you might not be able to afford me, which is something I can say in this way without sounding like a jerk. But if I'm in a freelancing situation, I'll say something to the effect of, let's not worry about that now. Let's focus coming up with a plan for solving your problem, and then we can talk about the details. Now, if this doesn't work and the other person on the other side can't get past price first, what might that tell you about that person, that company, that customer? They're cheap, yeah. What else? Right. Yep. No, that's true a lot of times. Right. Yep. Absolutely. What else?
Somebody else has already thrown a figure out there that your competition.
Yep.
From game theory, the person who mentions the price first loses.
Yes, I have heard that. The other thing all of you have touched on this, is that maybe that's a place you don't want to work because you don't fit into their budget. You don't fit in if they're cheap, so it's an indicator maybe you don't want to work there. And I've made that mistake. I really wanted the work. I didn't know how much to charge. I put out a very low number. I accepted what was given me. Worst project of my life. It's always the lower budget projects that take up most of your time. This always seems to be the case. So, rule number 2 of the town of Ask is don't look back. And what I mean by that is that in terms of your current or past rate or salary, just don't even go there. What you currently make, what you currently charge, is absolutely irrelevant to your current negotiation. This is probably the most important piece of advice I can give you today, is don't tell them what you make. For one thing, you might currently be underpaid, in which case, by mentioning what you make, you're setting yourself back even farther. This is more common in an employer-employee type scenario than in a freelance or independent scenario, but you'll be asked some variation of how much do you currently make? So here's what I say instead. I say, find your own words, come up with the best and most polite way of saying no. I would prefer not to, it is my policy not to, and practice it because it's going to be hard to keep saying no to this. Once when I was negotiating salary, I was asked variations on that question, how much do you make? And I had to say no 4 or 5 times until we finally got past that. Again, if you can't get past this point, You want to consider whether you really want to be in this situation. If that's all that they're focusing on, they don't even want to talk about anything else first except the price. So both of these first two rules about putting off price discussion until later and about not revealing your current salary or price information, again, ties back to our good news. These rules put your market value precisely under your own control. Now, if you do get past this point, the next question is going to be, how much are you looking for? Or how much are you going to charge us? Which leads us to rule number 3, which is bring your anchor. So when you're asked that question, how much are you looking for, how should you respond? Now, some people advise that you should never give a number, always let the other person bring up salary or price. I tried that one time, and it went a little something like this. The person asked, how much are you looking for? And I said, well, what do you think sounds fair? And they said, well, that depends. What type of range were you interested in? And I said, well, for a developer in my position for this company, what's a typical range? And he said, well, it really varies on person to person. And we went on around this for about 5-10 minutes, and I felt like an idiot. And I didn't know what my value was. So I gave a number. And the guy said, that sounds great. And I immediately knew that I had made a mistake. So what do you do instead? Is anyone familiar with the concept of anchoring? Anybody heard of that before? Yeah, okay. Anchoring is another example of a cognitive bias. And anchoring is the tendency that people have to attach most meaning to the first piece of information that they receive. Meaning, if I give a number first, I have anchored that discussion, that negotiation, toward that point. Let's say you're in negotiation and the other person is thinking $20 an hour, hypothetically, for your position. And if I say I'm looking for $40 an hour, all of a sudden you go from 20 to now 30 becomes a compromised position. You take it by aiming high, you are taking that negotiation to a higher level. And $20 is now the minimum in that person's mind rather than a range around 20. And that's why you should aim high because of anchoring. If you've done your research and you know your market value, use your market value and add a percentage to it, 20, 30%, as high as you can go and still keep a straight face, because it's going to be hard because you probably think your market value is high already if you've done your work, and then you add percentages to that and you say, there's no way they're gonna go for that. So you have to practice it. Now the common concern here is that you will name a price so high they will immediately tell you to go home, get lost, we don't want to see you again. That's not going to happen. If you followed all the rules in the town of Ask, and you've gotten them to fall in love with you, again, professionally speaking, the worst that will happen is they will say, if they like you, they'll say, we can't afford that. We'd like you to work here. We can't afford that. How about X instead? And at that point, you're in a great negotiating position because you've anchored it at that high point, and you're probably better off than you would have been in the first place. I also want to mention that this can work if you want to stay where you are, but you think you're underpaid. It's tougher to get a pay increase, I think we all know, in your current position than to get a new job. It can be done. Remember I told you that I keep notes and kind of reminders to myself that I use at review time of all the things I've done. On one occasion, I asked for a meeting with my manager long ago, and I said, I think I deserve salary X because of all these things I've done, and I think you're going to have a hard time finding someone else to do all these things for a salary of X. And I ended up getting that salary. And the lesson is you don't get what you don't ask for. And in the worst case, the answer is going to be no. People expect you to ask for more money. You're not going to offend anyone by asking for more money. They just might tell you no. Additionally, the implication is, although you would never say this directly, that if you don't give me salary X, maybe there's somebody else out there who might. So you plant it in the other person's mind. So by anchoring and aiming high, you'll likely find that our good news is still true, that your market value is higher than you think. Well, that's all for the town of Ask. Like I said, it was a small place, but really a necessary one. Most of the work gets done in the city of No. And if you get that right, Ask is a lot easier to negotiate. So it's time to get back on the road, and I bet you have a question lurking in the back of your mind. I wonder what that question could be. Anyone? Yes. My answer is, if I have to stop this car, I will, because I'm officially tired of answering that question. But it turns out that, again, yes, we are there. We have finally reached the grand junction of reject and receive. Now, when we visited the town of Ask, there are a couple places where things could go wrong or break down. And in each of those places, you have the opportunity and the option to reject or to walk away, just as Evan Spiegel and Snapchat did with Facebook. So while we're waiting here, deciding which of these we're going to take, I have a quick story that illustrates the power of rejection, which I discovered for the first time entirely by accident. So I was buying this car, a 94 Corolla, my first car back in 1997, and that's why I say it's probably the greatest car ever created. The car was selling for a little over $7,000. I had a check from the bank for a loan for $6,500, and I had about $250 in savings, and that was all that I had. So I took the car for a test drive and everything, and I liked it, and I told the salesperson, well, I can give you $6,750 for the car. That's all I have. And the guy's like, well, let me go talk to my manager. This was my first car buying experience, so I didn't know what go talk to the manager meant. So he comes back and says, well, $6,900 is the best we can do. We can't go any lower than that. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, this sucks, because I really like this car, but it looks like I can't afford it. I literally had no more money to spend on it. So I get up and say, well, thank you for your time. You have my phone number if you change your mind. I start walking to the door, and the guy's like, well, hold on a second. Let me go talk to my manager again, see if there's something we can work out. And I'm like, that was weird. So there's power in just getting up and leaving sometimes, just saying no. I have one more concept to share before our road trip comes to an end, and that is BATNA. Anybody heard of this term? Okay, yeah. BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. In other words, if you can't get what you want, what will you accept instead? What's your plan B? So let me give you an example. Sadly, I'm afraid the 94 Corolla that you are all riding in actually no longer exists. It's now a flattened piece of metal in some automotive junkyard somewhere, or has become a tin can for someone's soup. And it was about 19 years old finally when it went to the great junkyard in the sky. And although I didn't shoot it to put it out of its misery, I did something almost as bad. It was getting to the point where it was leaking about 10 quarts of oil a day. So I had to keep throwing more and more oil in it. So one day the oil light comes on, and I'm like, I'm sure I can make it to work and put the oil in later. Well, I did make it to work. It took me about 3 hours because I had to go through side streets and alleys because the car would only go about 10 miles an hour. But my mechanic took pity on me. He gave me $250 to take it for scrap and haul it away. But at that point, I really did need a new car. I knew what I wanted. It was a Honda Fit. What I did was I emailed several dealers asking for a quote. The lowest quote I got back from all the dealers was $9,000. Well, let's say it was. It was more than that. So that becomes my BATNA. $9,000 is my BATNA. I can go back to every other dealer who gave me a higher quote. I know I can try to negotiate them down past $9,000, and I have nothing to lose. I can get up and I can walk away at that point. Maybe they'll make me a better offer because I know I have that backup plan. So here's a slightly different example. Let's say your current job pays $10 an hour, and let's say you already have a job offer from another company for $20. So your BATNA becomes $20. But there doesn't even have to be another offer. You might decide that the risk of changing jobs for yourself is worth an extra, let's say, $5 an hour. So your BATNA is $15 an hour. And if you don't get $15 an hour, you're just not going to take the offer. It's not worth it to you to change jobs. So if somebody offers you $11 or $12, you just know you're not going to take it. So this is all to say that you have to know what your BATNA is. And if you don't get that, you have to walk away. That's very important. And that's why I say at the junction of reject and receive, you have to know and believe in your market value. Because it's often extremely hard to walk away from an offer, especially when you've done all that work to get there. Okay, so one last story about BATNA. I was in a job interview a few years ago. This is not my interview, I just like this picture. I had finally done everything correctly. I visited the city of No, found out my value, followed all the rules in the town of Ask. I anchored and I aimed high, so we negotiated. I had no other offers, but my BATNA was based on a combination of my current salary and the type of work I wanted to do. I was willing to take a lower salary at this point because the position was going to give me more experience, so it was kind of a blend. So we got down to the end, and they said salary X was as high as they could go, but it was lower than my BATNA, what I had already decided, predetermined. And it was a really tough decision. I really liked the job, but I said, this is what I decided beforehand, so I'm gonna walk away. And I walked away from that offer. And about 2 weeks later, the company called me back, and they offered me what I had asked for in the first place. Now, does it always work like that? Of course not. I've had places where they say, well, see you later. And that's all it becomes of it. But even saying no is not an end. It's often a road to another new opportunity. So I guess at the fork in the road here, receive on the right-hand side is like running up to hug the guy on the bicycle. But the rejection road on the left is not empty either. There's lots of places to see, places to go along the way. Well, I've had a fun trip. Thank you all for going on the road trip with me. Glad you were able to come. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, feel free to come down and ask, and enjoy the movie.